So, funny story, I was actually looking at starting up a coffee shop right there, in that building. That building has been abandoned almost. I don't see anyone living in it. There's no one in the co-working space they set up. No retail units that have been set up as well. I feel like I kind of dodged a bullet by waiting. I was waiting to set that shop up until I had a full business plan and something I was actually really comfortable with, all the financial risk involved in setting up a shop. As I was waiting and waiting, I kept seeing this location. I ended up viewing it. It was nice inside, but the amount they were asking for the location just wasn't worth it. It would have been great if they had all the people living there and it was more of an established location. People started actually going there, but from what I saw, no one heads down that way, and if they did, it's usually to get through to the station. Rarely do they actually pop into anything on that road. Glad I didn't sign that lease. That would have been a mistake, honestly. There's not enough people to make that viable. You'll learn this about me. I have many hobbies. At one point I was into vertical farming. Longer term friends managed to talk me out of setting up a vertical farm in the center of Brighton. The idea was that you could have like a store at the front of it and the vertical farm at the back, so you would end up just growing all the produce on site. I even went so far as like finding a warehouse to set the whole thing up in, the whole storefront, got the whole thing designed out, and then kind of at the last minute ended up canning that idea, and then slowly the passion for vertical farming ended up dropping off as well. I go a little full on with hobbies. Probably not the best idea, but also not the worst. I wouldn't recommend going as full on as I do on some things. If you ever meet me in person, ask me what my hobby is that month and I'll tell you. The good staples that I've stuck with so far have been leather crafting, ring making, and photography. I've been really into photography for a very long time, just never really found a way of making it something I do commercially. But even then, I'm kind of happy I don't, because it's one hobby that I've never really tried to turn into a business. For some reason, if a hobby isn't something I can do commercially, then it just frustrates me, which is really weird because I love my hobbies, but for some reason I always try and turn them into a business. Leather crafting, I was going to set up an online store where I would just sell my goods. I even called it tiny batch goods. I think the reason I do this is because I've always been passionate about games, for example, right? I wanted to become a game developer very early in life. I did all the things that turned my hobby, which was game dev at the time, into a career, and I've had a pretty long career in it. So for some reason I do that with all of my hobbies. I try and turn them into a business, which I don't think is necessarily the best thing to be doing. It's definitely something I need to teach myself out of. I've got myself the wireless charger mount, which I'm testing out today. On the Honda Rebel there's a USB-C connector underneath the seat. You kind of have to route the cable in, then get an adapter from a USB-A to USB-C, then plug that in. Would much prefer if it was a USB-C to USB-C cable. I would have just bought a USB-C cable, but the one provided is all weatherproof. The only real option I had was an adapter. So quad lock, if you're listening, USB-C to USB-C with the waterproofing would be great. Thank you. The last GoPro was a Hero 4 and I used that a lot, but I never really liked the footage that came out of it. You know, it was good, but it was never good, you know. I always wished it was more. And then as I started riding, I really wanted to go out with the camera. I hadn't realized how much the GoPros had changed over time. Let's just say that. So bear in mind, I got the Hero 11 about 2 months ago, and I have been blown away by the features on this thing. The ultra wide, like hyper view thing, which is what you're looking at right now, which I think is just fantastic for this kind of riding. And then you've got super view, which is like a slightly more pushed in version, and you've got the linear, these like lenses in one camera, and I'm really impressed by the quality that's coming out. The footage is great. It's really easy to work with the colors as well. I don't know if you noticed in the last video, I did a bit of color grading. The footage out of the camera with the GoPro grading, but it was just a bit too punchy, you know? It wasn't a look that I was after. So the fact that it has a flat profile makes it easy for me to work with. The audio is pretty good as well. Haven't noticed any issues. There is still the wind noise issues to fight with, and I put a tiny dead cat on the microphone, which is in my helmet, which should help with some of that residual wind noise, which is somehow getting through, well, the entire helmet and the padding. Yeah, ideally all that stuff just becomes less of a problem the more experience I get. But yeah, every single video I've learned more and more. It's been really fun doing this. The responses have been great. The feedback I've been getting from people is really encouraging. Just makes me want to do it more. So thank you if you've been watching and you've been supporting me. It's been great. Definitely look forward to sharing more of these adventures with you, especially as I do further and like longer distance rides. Oh, it's beautiful. Absolutely stunning. See, this is the thing, like when I was like spending those years just sort of locked away staring at screens, I forgot how much I love being outside, and just it makes me feel alive a lot more, just the act of being outside and, you know, doing something physical. Like I feel like I'm living. For years I just felt like I was existing, you know. I didn't have anything. I'd become quite boring as a person. I would only talk about work because that's all I had, and I didn't know how to talk to anyone who wasn't in the industry, which kind of sucked, because as much as I love people in our industry, it's really important to like have something outside of it, so you have stories to share that aren't related to work, because then you have something interesting to talk about. Like a friend of mine is into sailing, and every time I talk to him, he talks about, like, we talk about sailing, and I love that. You know, we can occasionally just talk a bit about work, but there's no need to, you know. We just want to talk about sailing for a little bit. So I was on the fence about getting an Africa Twin for a while, because I like the kind of idea of an adventure bike. You know, it's a big bulky bike that can go off-road, and it's definitely a bike that I would probably end up getting in the future as a second bike, you know. The reason I went for the Rebel as my first big bike was because it's pretty comfortable doing long distance rides as long as you're not really going off-road. So the kind of touring that I plan on doing most of the time, for now at least, is going to involve roads like this. You know, I don't expect to be going dirt roads anytime soon. I like the way this bike looks, I like the way it feels, I like the kind of riding position, so I'm going to stick to that kind of touring for now. But, you know, should there be a meet up in the middle of the Highlands in Scotland, I'm driving this thing all the way up there, and it's going to be awesome.